Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. It is good to be gathered again. We are just now passing through what was 20 years ago, my readjustment period. That is to say, when Penelope and I had come to the United States from Japan, having both lived there for about 3 years, and getting used to doing things in the U.S. once more. But as welcome as it was, and as nice as it was to be home, I was glad of many of the lessons that I had learned while living abroad. When I was in Japan, I was teaching English, but do not imagine me standing in front of a room with 30 middle schoolers. Instead, the place where we worked was more of a small tutorial setting. So every 40 minutes, we would teach 3 people, 2 people, sometimes only 1 person in some segment of English, and then we would shift and do that again for another group and another throughout the workday. This meant the bulk of our students were adults. However, being Japan, the bulk of our students were not the most talented English speakers. Although Japanese learn English in their school formally, they do not learn conversational English very successfully through the education system. And so they would come to our company to polish their conversational skills. Which meant, since most of the students were beginner conversationalists, even if they had good reading skills, that when you occasionally would see an upper-level student on your schedule, you would be quite excited. Here was a chance to engage in something a little bit more complicated than big and small, old and young, or he was, she was, and basic grammar forms. Now we could do more advanced material. And some of the students would come in and their English would be quite excellent. And really what they were looking for was a chance to keep it in practice, to keep it fluent. And I remember very specifically from one of these students that I had one of the slap-in-the-face moments of realizations. She was a local artisan, and as we were discussing different arts and different aspects of culture, and she was excelling, of course, in her language, I mentioned that, I'd always thought that maybe I would like to learn to play the piano, but given my left hand's lack of dexterity due to my genetic form, it was something that really was beyond my reach. And she looked at me with uncharacteristic bluntness for Japan and said, I know a man with only one hand who plays the piano beautifully. Why can't you? It took me aback. After living in Japan at that point for more than a year, I wasn't used to people being quite that direct and blunt. But she was absolutely right. Well, what difference did it make? Oh, maybe if I'm going to keep my mind in perspective, I don't expect to play at Carnegie Hall. Maybe. But really, can I say that just because my left hand doesn't have the spread of a concert pianist measured upon some ruler, that I can't learn to play the piano? Of course not. It was an excuse that I then used. I claimed that something was out of reach, and then decided not to pursue it. I didn't pursue it and find that it was out of reach. And that realization was something that has stuck with me ever since. And when I realized that I wanted to be a rabbi, which also was a realization that struck me while I was living in Japan and trying to create a Jewish life for myself in the wilderness, I realized that I would need to master certain skills. I would need to learn Hebrew. Now, in high school, I was terrible at languages. But having just realized, thanks to my student, that just because I had not accomplished something in the past did not mean I could not accomplish it in the future, I set to work arranging with one of the local Israelis to begin learning Hebrew even while I was in Japan. I realized I would need to learn how to sing. As someone who grew up being told, keep your mouth shut, rather than singing in the choir, in the school choir, I was rather hesitant of whether I'd ever be able to carry a tune well enough to keep a congregation from fleeing the room. But, having learned the lesson from my student, I realized in Japan I had the perfect opportunity to practice. You may have heard this, but they invented something known as karaoke, or karaoke as we say in the US. And they have the perfect version, which is not going to sing in a bar full of drunken strangers, but to go and sing in a small room with you and your friends and a few drinks, which I'll tell you takes all of the intimidation away and allows you to simply sit back and relax, which is ultimately the key to singing well and on key. So, with these skills beginning to grow, and my confidence beginning to rise, the rabbinate actually seemed possible, rather than simply a daydream of some expat in Japan, which, of course, has led me here, now 20 years later. So too, in this Torah portion of Re'eh, so too, God says through Moses, I have given you a choice, a blessing and a curse. Follow my commandments, and you will find blessing. Break my commandments, and you will find trouble, suffering, shortages, heartache. This is not meant to be a warning. This is not meant to be a reward. Simply an acknowledgement of this is what the commandments are meant to do. They're meant to better our lives. And if we choose not to better our lives, then the alternative, of course, is that our lives will not be as good. But God does not say, you, Mr. Shapiro, you will be one who follows the commandments, and you, Mr. Levy, you will not be one who follows the commandments. You will be righteous, and you will not be. God tells us, you, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Levy, Mr. Cohen, every one of you, you have a choice. It is up to you. Do not claim that you were born to be a sinner. Do not claim that you were born to be righteous and therefore do not have to struggle. You, like all of us, have the ability to choose for yourself to be a good person or not. And if you choose to be good, yasher koach, you have lived up to the potential and the reason that you were placed on this earth. If you choose not to be, you have no one to blame but yourself. Yes, you can blame certain physical limitations. You can blame your vocal cords for keeping you off American Idol. But that does not mean that you can still not sing joyously. You can blame your handstand from keeping you from Carnegie Hall. But that does not mean you could not learn to play the piano pleasantly and well enough to entertain yourself. You can blame your circumstances for sometimes making it harder to keep your patience, to find your balance, to encourage you from your surroundings to do the right thing. But ultimately, whatever the external factors are, choosing between good and evil is a knowledge that has been placed inside each of us. From the first, Adam and Chava, from Adam and Eve, that is the blessing that mankind has been given. All of humanity, from the greatest to the least of us, begins with the same simple choice. Choose a blessing or choose its opposite. The choice is yours. No excuses. Shabbat Shalom.